Badlands. What are the Badlands? Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
All right, welcome everybody to this week's Breaking History. And Gordon and I are very, very happy to be back with you. We are doing a pre-record. This is going to be, we are recording this about 34 hours before you will be watching this broadcast. So forgive us if certain things that should be addressed that occurred after this point in time and before you having watched this were not addressed. It's outside of our control. How you doing, Gordon?
Good, man. What you're referring to, I believe, is what Chris Paul calls informational time travel, which is a phenomenon that you begin to appreciate when you do this kind of stuff, where you live stream, but then sometimes you pre-record, or that you go back and you listen to live streams as recordings that were recorded previously, and you know things that the person speaking doesn't know, and you start to get like these Back to the Future kind of vibes, like Inception, whatever, kind of vibes. But yeah, but the good news is that so we are pre-recording. The primary reason being this week is GART, and while I'm not traveling on Wednesday, I got a lot going on Wednesday, and it's better to do it like this. But the good news is that this particular episode, we're not doing the typical, or we're not doing the news cycle show. We're doing a deep dive into a specific topic. And I think it's a topic that is very relevant. It's a topic that came to us from the Badlands Boost, or it was either a rant or a boost, where a listener a Badlander had suggested that we talk about William McKinley and the tariffs. And if you, I'm going to turn this over to Matt because this is his forte. But I think with everything that Trump has said about abolishing the IRS, abolishing the Federal Reserve, getting rid of the federal tax code, we should really begin to try to wrap our heads around what that looks like, historical precedent for it. I think there's a lot of people that if you just went up and said that to them, they think you're nuts. They probably think Trump's blowing smoke. Like there's no way you could get away with this. How is the country going to function if we're not taxed to death? If we're not giving half our income to the federal government, how's the federal government going to function?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people are very confused by this, and they're confused by design. And I would say, when I say by design, I mean that our education system is wired by those very same institutional forces. Well, killed and murdered. What is that? That killed Abraham Lincoln and every single one of our great presidents who rose to the occasion, including William McKinley, whom Trump has referenced numerable times. Since really 2016, as well as Lincoln. And I got to just say a little disclaimer here as a side note. My internet right now is not good. I don't know why, but I feel like people will be noticing that I'm glitching a bit. And I'm sorry. I don't know if you've noticed that.
A little bit, but it's not terrible. It's only happened a few times. But yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's going to keep happening, but it won't be unbearable. Like it'll work. So just grind your teeth with me and just push through it. Don't worry.
It's Canadian internet. We forgive you.
Yeah, thank you. It's the Aurora Borealis cosmic rays just scrambling. So, and our igloos just don't get good internet insulation. So, yeah, that's right. So, Trump has made the point so many times that the Republican Party needs to be brought back to the proper traditions of Lincoln and McKinley. You and I have spoken about this a bunch of times as well. And I think that a whole university and, well, high school, kids should be learning this in high school, even elementary school, frankly. But you could build a whole curriculum off of this. So we're going to do like a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to introduce some of the drama, some of the fights. I'm sure you're going to have a bunch of thoughts to throw in. I got some slides. I made some slides this afternoon just to make it a bit visceral. And I think one of the recent things you just shared not that long ago was a little statement from somebody who exhibits this ignorance of a victim of our education system. And you shared this on your Telegram channel, where a typical neocon talking point attacking protectionism was put forth by this, I can't even pronounce his name, Playush Mittal or something.
I mean,
Where
he's a fairly large account. He has like 60,000 followers. So this isn't just like some random guy. That's, it's a person with a decent sized following, 50 or 60,000 followers, putting out something like this.
Right. Yeah, and it's a very overly simplistic, mechanistic equation, like a very mathematical approach to try to debunk something that's much more dynamic than his mathematical mind can understand. Where he's basically saying protectionism is stupid because here's how it looks: American company currently imports a shirt for $20 a piece. American company sells a shirt at its store for $40 a piece. Hence capitalism. And now let's say Trump goes and puts a 50% tariff on it because it's an import from China. Well, now the American store pays $30 a piece for the import of the same shirt. American store now sells the same shirt in the store, same shirt for $50 a piece, and then the consumer gets screwed. Basically, is what he's implying.
What he says is that
so
all that gets passed off to the consumer. Yeah.
Yeah. And that there's so many fallacies embedded within that. And we're going to, like, looking at this history, we're going to address some of that stuff because this is the same type of argument that was made by the free traders against Lincoln, against McKinley over a century ago. And I'm going to start here with
and before we pivot away from that, let me just say, like, the reason I get so fired up over that and the reason I had such an aggressive response to this guy was because I went and looked at his profile. I don't even think he's like a right winger or a conservative, like a Republican. I think it seems like he's actually like further on the left, which is the irony of him presenting something like this. But it just kind of goes to show like the subversive nature of these arguments and the fact that a leftist would come in and present what I would consider a traditional neocon talking point. This is what the Republicans have been saying for decades. They've been saying that you cannot put tariffs in place because if you do, the consumer is going to suffer. The consumer is going to pay the price. And that is just now that I understand like the way the world works, like that is just the biggest load of bullshit that has ever been stated. And these people are such ruthless liars to be telling you that putting tariffs on foreign goods is going to hurt the consumer rather than it's going to benefit the small business owner, the American-based small business owner. It's like, don't get me started.
No, man. Well, I'm going to get you started. That's the point of the show is to get you started. And I'm going to get started. And everybody watching should just get started and get pissed off in a healthy, educated way. Because the way that we built this society, and I include Canada into this discussion, the way we built it is not through the way we destroyed it. We know how we destroyed it. It's called globalization. It's been going on as a test now for 40 years, or really it accelerated like 35 years ago. With massive liberalization of everything, deregulation of everything. And we knew the effect of this globalization of free trade, which was nations got stripped of their ability to protect the people, which is the whole point of having nation states, is so that people could organize to have power to protect themselves and to also offensively attack the oligarchy. Like it's the offensive defensive power structure that the people recently in history organized. And the institutions of government, the elected institutions of government, which are constitutional, include the right to utilize protectionism as a shield against the weaponization of cheap dumping of goods. So we got rid of all of that. We saw what the effect of free trade has been now for 35 years or longer even, which involves corporate, mergers and acquisitions out of the wazoo, banks and corporations more powerful than governments telling us what to do, and governments that are very, very much incompetently run, completely run by whores and prostitutes who have no interest in the people who elected them. And in many cases are not even there because people elected them. So we know what that looks like. So let's go back to what actually built our society, not what destroyed it. What built it was the utilization of protective tariffs. And so I've got here three images. Number one, first image. This is a memorial image right after McKinley was killed in 1901, featuring the tradition of Garfield, Lincoln, and McKinley. All three of whom died within a very short period of each other. Lincoln first, but then Garfield in 1881 or 1880, and then McKinley. All of them were Republicans. All of them were exhibiting the best aspects of the Republican Party of the 19th century, to varying degrees. Lincoln put forth his policy as a whole, because McKinley was the last Lincoln Republican. He was a Civil War veteran, the last American president who was a Civil War veteran, who understood what the nature of the game was really about. And Lincoln put it very clearly that his policies are short and sweet, or my politics are short and sweet, like the old woman's dance. I am in favor of a national bank and a high protective tariff. Simple. And he said this when he was a congressman with John Quincy Adams, fighting against the U.S.-Mexican War, which was the first sort of imperial war that wasn't needed, that should not have happened, you could say, in the 1840s. And he was actually stumping for, at the time that he said that, he was stumping for President Harrison, the president who was in power for literally like 3 months before he was murdered, poisoned. And he was fighting to basically revive the full Whig. He was a Whig president. And the best of the Whigs all organized themselves. When the Whig Party became too corrupted by the 1850s, they basically organized and created the Republican Party in 1856, which included Abraham Lincoln. Before that, the Whigs was the driving force in the 1830s, 40s of the real patriots who understood what the protective tariff was, what the national bank really was meant to be as far as something constitutional, not something run by private interests. And so Harrison dies.
So Harrison was poisoned, because the story that you're told as a child in America, like in first grade, is that he gave a speech that was like 3 hours long in the pouring rain at his inauguration against the wishes of his wife. And that's why he got a really terrible cold and died.
Yeah, that's right. That's a story we're given. It's right up there with Zachary Taylor's story, who died in 1851. And we're told, oh, he died because he ate too many cherries and cold milk too fast. And he just died. He coughed up black stuff and died. Must have been cold milk. And both of these guys, they're both like, Whig leaders who understood the nature of this occult battle against this takeover of America that was underway. Harrison, whose son, William, this is William Harrison, but his son becomes President Harrison in 1890, and has a Secretary of State named James Blaine, who plays a very big role in organizing McKinley. He's one of the key patrons of McKinley. Now, the other thing here that I got is a little cartoon of McKinley. There's a lot of these cartoons back in the 19th century. Some of them are pretty good. This one basically has free trade swamp and a bunch of pro-free traders who are, representing the economic collapse. Like, under free trade, things are very, very tumultuous. When you have just unmitigated free trade, the problem is what happens is you have a lot of speculation. It's been like that since the early 19th century, every single time, because all of a sudden, when you just allow the markets to randomly just change according to what people want on the stock markets, when that happens, you have so much volatility because people will start speculating on cotton, on real estate, on commodities, whatever, not because they want to invest in an enterprise, not because of that. They're looking at it like a casino. Like, I want the numbers to go up. I'm trying to like game the system. So people are increasingly making more erratic decisions that create volatility, that create bubbles, like the tulip bubble of in the Netherlands, where tulips were selling for the price of, whole castles, until people realized, hey, what are we doing? These are tulips. And then the thing collapsed. And that's the way all of these bubbles work. So, McKinley was basically saving these people who were drowning under their own stupidity by introducing protective tariffs. And he says here, it says, who wants free trade? McKinley asked. England wants it, demands it, not for our own good, but for hers. Again, he was the president from 1896. He was murdered in 1901. And I got a quote also on the question of free trade that's useful here, because it gets in the drama of it. He understood that it's not just purely practical economics, but it was part of a fight. It's not just business alone. And it's a two-part quote, which is great, from 1882, his speech to Congress, when he finally gets his big McKinley tariff policy in 1890 under President Harrison, the son of the murdered president, who he becomes an advisor to. James Blaine is the Secretary of State and gives him a lot of clout, puts him on the Ways and Means Commission in Congress, and gives him the authorization to draft a tariff bill in 1890 because he's the guy who's been fighting for it the loudest and most consistently as a represent in the House of Representatives for like 15 years. And in one great speech, I just extracted this quote where he says, "Who wants free trade?" That's the name of his speech. "England wants it, demands it, not for our good, but for hers. For she is more anxious to maintain her old position of supremacy than she is to promote the interests and welfare of the people of this republic. And a great party in this country voices her interest. She would manufacture for us and permit us to raise wheat and corn for her. We are satisfied to do the latter, but unwilling to concede to her the monopoly of the former." Then it gets really good. So yeah, he's not saying like we don't want raw materials exports. He's not saying we're not willing to export raw goods. He's just saying that we should also have finished goods too, manufactured goods. That also, not either or. And he says here, free trade may be suitable to Great Britain and its peculiar social and political structures, but it has no place in this republic, where classes are unknown and where caste has long since been banished, where equality is a rule, where labor is dignified and honorable, where education and improvement are the individual striving of every citizen, no matter what may be the accident of his birth or the poverty of his early surroundings. Here the mechanic of today is the manufacturer of a few years hence. Under such conditions, free trade can have no abiding place here. Now, he makes the point that for a time when you do protective tariffs, prices, it's true, will rise. That's a true. That is a consequence at first. However, as McKinley has said, we don't value cheap goods. When you have things that are always going more cheap and cheap and cheap, you create cheap people, because the laborers who will produce the cheap goods cannot live with higher living standards. They can't use high technology. They have to stay cheap labor. You have to have poor people who are underdeveloped so that they don't expect what a more civilized person with access to education and technology and knowledge and living standards would expect a higher wage. And he made the point, we want our workers well paid. So our workers are going to be getting better paid. And also the quality of that which is consumed will also be improved, because a slave is not going to produce, though they'll be cheaper, they will not produce the same quality good as somebody who is knowledgeable and well paid and can live longer and demands a higher quality product. Now, at the same time, the point there is that by allowing for the protection of your manufacturing from cheap goods, because now it becomes more favorable to purchase locally than it does to buy domestically. Things that are shipped from, let's say, China, halfway around the world, takes 40 days for the goods to arrive. It ends up actually taking way more energy than the product itself actually costed to produce. And now you're going to have it in Dollaramas. So you're going to be paying for this thing, which is going to undercut the ability to have local manufacturers do it ourselves. What it could have been done around the corner. We could have had factories like we used to, producing things, the textiles, the clothing, the cars that we used to have ourselves. So the protective tariff is going to, on the one hand, yes, for a time make the prices increase, but at the same time, because your whole dynamic of society is going to be more productive, the buying power of the dollar will increase at a higher rate. So $1 is going to go further. Like people in the 1960s, a father with like 4 kids and a wife who didn't have to work, that one man with the one job that was a decently paying job with one paycheck could have a 2-car garage, could have a house, could put money aside for vacation, right? So the buying power of the dollar in that composition of a society that was productive, that had full spectrum economy in the 50s and the 60s, could just go way further than today, where you have two parents often working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, and they're still just eking by.
Yeah,
even though
like
nominally they're making more money per hour than they were 50 years ago.
Yeah, like when you say cheap products create cheap people, just look at America right now. Look at the quality of the standard of living now as opposed to even 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, look at the buildings we're making. Look at the cheap crap that you get off of whatever Walmart, Amazon, whatever it is. Look at the quality of everything. The quality is crap. I mean, at this point, everybody likes, even the hipsters are into all the retro stuff because they recognize that the retro stuff is quality. They recognize that if you go find something that was made 50 years ago, it's a much higher quality than something that was made in the past 20 years. So this is universally recognized by everyone, even the people who love what you're describing, free trade. It's like it's insane to think that you're going to use slave labor to produce something and you're going to have a higher quality or like a higher culture. You're never going to achieve a higher culture using slave labor.
Never, no way. And that's, even look at Cuba, right? Like we destroyed their economy by weaponizing the US dollar and sanctioning them for like 80 years or whatever. But at the same time, their cars are all American made cars from the 50s. So there's still a lot of them. You go to Cuba and there's tons of American cars from the 50s everywhere because they're just made differently with a different philosophy. This is before the sanctions began on Cuba, so they had tons of cars. And now forget about that. We're not going to see in 50 years time from the future, the current, spectrum of cars on the road today. They just won't be there. It's made, we are now in a philosophy of controlled obsolescence. So all that to say, the higher quality of your labor force, the higher quality of the goods, and over time, you will find that the prices will diminish, right? Because as you, at first, when you grow a new enterprise, like let's say your society has zero means of producing rail cars or rail gauges. So you have no means of doing that. You rely on some industry from another country that can make that for you. They could set the tone of how much they want to charge you, and they could also cut it off. If you're like halfway through building a rail project and all of a sudden that country doesn't like you anymore, they could cut you off and you're screwed. Your project's not going anywhere if you can't do it yourself. Now, at first, when you have zero and now you want to start building something like that, an ironworks or a steel mill, and you don't have any, at first it's going to be highly energy intensive, and at first it's going to be expensive. That's true like anything. My first computers, I remember when my mom brought home a computer back in the 90s. That thing was, in my standards today, my phone does way more than that computer does, but it cost like probably $4,000. It was crazy expensive, The memory had less memory than a cheap USB stick that I can get at the Dollarama today. But you could see like that was at first. But as the production system gets underway, things become more cheap as you produce more and you learn how to do the thing. That's the case back in the day in the 19th century as much as today. It's a universal law across the board. The other thing is that the Civil War was being the U.S. was going to lose the Civil War. The U.S. was going to be broken up into two pieces, and the Associated Banks of New York under James Gallatin during the Civil War were basically telling Lincoln basically the same things that Trump is being told by certain idiot neocons today, that if you want to raise money, the only way you can get revenue to do things is through increasing taxes. And that's what they were saying. You can pay for the war by increasing the taxes, but how are you going to do that? There's nothing there to tax anymore. You can only, you can't milk a dead horse. There's only so much you can do. And also they were also saying that the New York banks were going to get the monopoly over the U.S. debt, along with Rothschild banks are going to get the monopoly over the debt. Now, Lincoln's solution was protective tariff, which he did one of the highest protective tariffs ever in American history, was under Lincoln during the Civil War. Unfortunately, it was destroyed by Johnson, who was an enemy completely of Lincoln's policies, his vice president. But he did the protective tariff. And the other thing he did is the greenbacks. So they went hand in hand. And the greenbacks involved a two-sided aspect where the idea was, okay, we are going to create a new kind of money, and that money is going to be tied to projects, specific projects, like the Transcontinental Railway. We're going to have, so you always have to have a mission. Without a mission, people perish, right? Without a vision, I should say, people perish, is the quote from the Bible. So the point of a sovereign nation is you always have to be able to have a mission for your people that organizes their talents, their priorities, their skill sets, and that gives the society as a whole a living spirit. And at the time, again, you had various canals being built during the Civil War, and also a vision that after America would save itself, come out intact, the people would on the hand also be better, not because they just fought to keep their society together, which they did, but also because of the both greenbacks, but also the 520 bonds. So that was state bonds that every citizen could purchase and did purchase as an act of patriotic faith in their society. Everyone bought the bonds that would mature in 5 to 20 years, and the bonds would be tied, that the investment of the people into the society would be tied to the projects that would then have a payback with good interest that you could pay back, that when the bond matures, you could get the bond plus interest, right? So everybody then, it became, you're not going to the New York bankers solely, or you're not going to the international Rothschild bankers in London for loans as a state. You're going to your own people, and your own people are getting a sense that they are investing in the thing that is maintaining their whole society's well-being into their kids' lives. And so there was a big discussion towards the end of the Civil War of what would be the next step. So already Lincoln had begun building the Transcontinental Railway. It would be finished in 1869. It would be finished. It was begun in 1863. And then he's already saying to Congress that the proposed overland telegraph between America and Europe by way of the Bering Straits and Asiatic Russia, which was sanctioned by Congress at the last session, has been undertaken under very favorable circumstances. Assurances have been received from most of the South American states of their high appreciation for the enterprise and their readiness to cooperate in constructing lines tributary to that world-encircling communication. I'm bringing that up because the point of the tariff is not simply to make revenue, because that's one thing. The state will get revenue by taxing goods being brought in that are not made in America or any state, because everybody should be doing that. Every country should have protective tariffs. It still works. It's not isolationism. We found every time that many states all at the same time have protective tariffs, it benefits everybody, and you still get trade amongst the states, except that the trade is happening amongst finished goods as well as unfinished goods. So people are actually there's still global trade. It's not, we're told it's isolationism, and it's a lie. It's not the case. Yep. It was happening when Canada had protective tariffs in 1905, 1906, and we were growing. And the same thing. There were still protective tariffs in the U.S., and the U.S. was growing. Maybe not to the extent that McKinley had the protective tariff of 1890, but it was still growth where it was applied. And when it wasn't applied, all we get is the transference of wealth to non-state actors in the private sector that utilize corporate power to impose empire. That's always the case of the inverse.
Yep. Well, and to that point, like we did a GART live stream last week, and I happened to be streaming from an airport. I won't say which one, but where I'd flown there with the engineer, like in his plane. We're doing a project there, and I had just finished eating lunch with the airport guys, like the airport managers. Is like a smaller airport, and they were telling me about some of the issues they were having. I mean, during the meeting, this came up, but then during lunch, we talked about it a little more. We had framed up walls, and we were waiting to put drywall up, but we had special metal brackets that were required on the electrical pieces before we could put drywall up. And because it was an FAA-funded project, government-funded project, everything had to be Buy American, right? Which sounds great. These brackets we were using, we specified were made in America. However, under NAFTA, we're actually under the whatever the thing was that Trump passed, the thing that replaced NAFTA was like NAFTA 2.0. These things were made in America, then they were shipped to Mexico to be put in packages, to then be shipped back to America to be sold. So these things were stuck in customs. Like we're sitting there waiting to complete our construction project to move forward, and these stupid little brackets that we have to put up on the electrical components to close in our walls are stuck in customs right now. Because the dickheads who, pardon my French, but the dickheads who run this company decided that shipping these things to Mexico to put them in boxes to then ship them back to America was like the best way to do it. Like that was the cheapest way for them to do it, but it was super inconvenient for the end user, for the consumer. And the airport guys were like, this happens on every single project. The things either get made in America and shipped to Mexico, or they get made in America and shipped to Canada, and they still check all the boxes that like say this is made in America, like buy American. But it's bullshit. It's all a bunch of smoke and mirrors. And these idiots who are doing this, they get special considerations and they get special leeway to do this. We're in a real pragmatic marketplace that would never be allowed. And the same thing, I could walk over to my refrigerator right now. I mean, we try to go to the farmer's market whenever we can, but I have 3 kids and they eat a lot of fruit, so we end up getting fruit from the grocery store. The fruit comes out of the grocery store rotten. Like my wife will place an order, and since COVID, they put all the groceries together. Then you go and you pick it up, and the fruit's rotten because you look and check the package, and it comes from Mexico. It's like, why am I eating fruit from Mexico? Why am I not eating fruit from there are dozens of farms within 20 miles of my house. Like, why am I not eating fruit from those farms?
Absolutely.
It's ridiculous, man. I mean, the idiots who have organized our society are either very cruel people, or they're just absolute morons. I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
It's definitely some combination of the both. I mean, there's definitely cruelty in those orchestrating this from the top, but it could only work if you got a lot of stupid people who don't know how to use common sense going along with it every step of the way. And it's just like you said, it's so absurd that we could, like in Canada too, like we have a ton of Alberta, tons of oil and natural gas. We used to have some refinement. Now we have zero refining capability, or hardly zero, nearly zero. And what we're doing is just we're sending it overseas or to the United States to be refined, and then we buy it all back. So it's pretty much right behind. It's in our own backyard. It's under our own soil, and we're not even like able to use it ourselves because some mathematicians have decided that there's going to be just this weird arrangement under NAFTA that will ensure that we just stay resource extractive. We're going to make our money that way. We don't need production because that's what other people do. And ultimately, even in the US, I mean, a lot of the industries that were once enjoyed in Detroit and Philadelphia, they're gone because the decision was made, well, we can get cheaper labor in Mexico. As long as they stay underdeveloped, their labor is going to be cheap, and they then will put all of this effort into transporting finished goods or whatever. In your case, they're trying to build back in a certain lame way, an incompetent way, some national manufacturing, but it's so incompetent. There's no intention to make it work. So it's not going to work. You have to have the intention. Or in the case of China or Indonesia, like they're like, oh, Mexico's too expensive, so let's go even further to the other side of the world and use even cheaper people. And it's just an addiction. It's a race to the bottom because you're always going to be addicted to some cheaper labor if possible, to the point that you're going to just have to literally use slaves instead of giving them $1 a day. It's like there's no end to this. It's insane.
Well, in the example that I just gave, I mean, just think about how stupid this is. They're taking these brackets, they're putting them in a box, they're shipping them like 1,000 miles away. They're then taking the brackets out, they're putting them in individual boxes, and then they're shipping them back. I mean, the person who thought that up should be punched in the face. And I'm not even kidding. Yeah. It's like, I mean, what an idiot. And you talk about speculating earlier with the markets. The person who invented the idea of the short sale, that person deserves a very special place in hell. And you get a really special and unique moment, like with this GameStop thing, which is wonderful, where all of these people, all these big institutions shorted the GameStop stock into oblivion. And then that guy came along and bought it and like turned the company around. And now there's that huge squeeze, and everyone's like, it could bring the whole market down because all these institutions have so much money in shorting this one stock. I mean, we don't get down that rabbit hole, but that is an amazing situation that I hope really comes back to bite some of those scumbags in the ass. But we should do My Pillow ad.
Oh, the ad. My God. Well, here. So were you able to download the functioning My Pillow? You were, right?
No, but I can share my screen.
Oh, yeah. Let's do that.
Okay.
Because of your overwhelming support, our 1488 My Pillow has been one of the biggest sales in My Pillow history. I couldn't think of a better way to say thank you than to extend our wholesale pricing through Christmas. Get a classic standard My Pillow for only $14.88. Upgrade to a queen size, just $18.88. King size, only $1 more. Get my body pillows for only $29.88. And ready? Multi-use My Pillows, only $9.88. It's perfect time to stock up for Christmas gifts for everyone on your list. Go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to take advantage of our wholesale pricing, including my classic standard My Pillows, only $14.88. But that's not all. I'm so confident you're going to love our classic My Pillows that I'm going to extend my 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st, 2025. Plus, orders over $75 ship absolutely free.
All right.
All right, let's remove that. There we are. Yeah, and for those who don't know, a short sale is basically when you bet that the price of something that you're going to invest in is going to go down. So obviously, that could be abused for people who may, let's say, want to collapse a business that's giving them trouble or that they don't like. They could just, if they have a lot of resources, let's say if they're a Soros level player and they've got hundreds of billions of dollars to play with, then you can, every act you do constantly causes artificially the entire market to respond to your, whether you buy up a currency, your very demand will cause all of the stock values of that thing you're buying to increase because you're buying so much of it. And if you sell it, it'll cause also the stock value to decrease. And if you basically do a short on a stock, that will itself cause it to fail because everyone's thinking, well, that guy, the multi-billionaire, knows what he's doing. He is a multi-billionaire after all, so we should all do the same thing. And then all of a sudden, a business can be wiped out. People can be unemployed in the thousands or more overnight by virtue of a short sale.
Yeah, and like it's very timely because you're seeing Bitcoin explode today in value, and so just like you can see a stock just explode in value or an asset, you can also see it just drop in value, right? Because they have a bad earnings report or some scandal or whatever. But that is supposed to represent people trying to get rid of their stock. If they're selling their stock, they're trying to get rid of it because they're like, I don't want to be involved in this anymore. I don't want to be invested in this anymore. But what a short sale is that I come in with whatever, $10 million, and I say, I am going to invest $10 million and bring the price of this down, which in my opinion is evil and criminal. But the big risk in it is that you can lose infinite amount of money because the price can go up infinitely. And as they have to sell to get out of their short sale position, it causes the price to go up even more, which is the situation they're in with GameStop.
Yeah. Well, I think that part of this is like the consequence of having a completely unregulated economy where nations have no role to play, and it's all just the random impulses of gamblers that are shaping the value of things. The reality is, like, investment in a proper capitalist system that involves proper healthy free enterprise should be a society that's grounded in production, like where you value that we're going to be open to investment, but you have to prove that you're worthy of investment because you produce something that is innovative and you do it well. And it's like, to that degree that you earn the confidence of people who then want to invest in you, you're actually, demonstrating that you're producing something more than you were last year, or doing it better with a new technology that other people couldn't come up with because you would sponsor it or were working with a Thomas Edison, or, like in the case of Lincoln and the fight for rail development, like America and rail becoming a national power was highly contingent upon, as Lincoln had pointed out, domestic rail, but also a view towards helping other nations develop full spectrum economies, including Russia, that saved America during the Civil War, South America, Latin America as a whole, Mexico, developed rail. because the understanding was geopolitically, on the one hand, it makes you less dependent upon those who control monopolies over the maritime shipping, which is Great Britain by and large. That's what it was. It was, an empire of the seas. You could by the empire controlling the choke points of the core ports strategically, they were able to control everybody who was dependent upon shipping. They were dependent because they didn't have inland development. The only way you have inland development is through rail. And to have rail means you have to have steel production, smelting. You have to have specialists to make the various engines, so many different parts, the moldings. Like, all of this is so dynamic. There's so much to building a real economy that can stand on its own 2 feet. And rail is a great way to just drive that, because so many things have to be brought into reality that don't exist if you don't have rail. If you're just an exporting, colony with like maybe ports, for your sweatshop exports on the skimming the big cities around the water, but nothing inland. And like one example of how the McKinley tariff, which was a 50% tariff on average of all incoming goods. Some things were lower, like sugar and molasses, but most things were increased quite high to almost 50% or higher. In 1890, it lasted till 1894. It did have a certain increase of prices. That's the McKinley tariff on Wikipedia, and that was when McKinley was still a congressman. And he had, again, the patronage of the grandson of William Harrison, the assassinated president of 1840, or his grandson. Also, a cousin, another Harrison, I think Calvin Harrison, was murdered in 1893. He was the mayor of Chicago, right in the midst of the Chicago World's Fair. And he also was a part of this fight that the other Harrison was part of. This Harrison, too, who was sponsoring this with James Blaine, also had Lincoln's son, what's his name? Robert Lincoln, is the Secretary of War. So they very much understood the nature of this British infiltration of America, and were trying to navigate through that. Now, what do you have there on? Yeah, eliminated tariff.
Well,
yeah,
this is fascinating. Let me read this part, because you're talking about imposing tariffs of roughly 50%. But here it says the act removed tariffs on sugar, molasses, tea, coffee, and hides, but authorized the president to reinstate the tariffs if the items were exported from countries that treated U.S. exports in a, quote, reciprocally unequal and unreasonable fashion. The idea was to secure reciprocal trade by allowing the executive branch to use the threat of reimposing tariffs as a means to get other countries to lower their tariffs on U.S. exports. What does that sound like? What does that remind you of, everybody? Does that remind you of Donald Trump and everything that he talks about when he says, I called up Macron in France and said, I'm going to put 100% tariff on all the wines and cheeses that come out of France in Champagne unless you do X, Y, Z. And he said every single time,
yes,
they're always tripping all over themselves to satisfy whatever conditions he's putting in place.
It forces honest deal making and dialogue. The human factor, which the oligarchy wants to remove, the human factor, and that's what makes humanity work, is the human negotiating process. That's where creativity, dialogue, deliberation comes in, and problem solving is through constant bilateral agreements, where exactly that. And that's the difference between the McKinley tariff is based on reciprocity. So it wasn't just simply a tariff. It was based on the idea that all of the Americas, including like Central and South America, would be engaged in this advantage where they could benefit by certain trade deals with America that would bypass certain protective regulations. But it would be all very, very much open to constant negotiation. And the European empires, England, France mostly, but especially England, would not benefit because they would not be part of this reciprocity agreement. They would not be invited to that discussion. The idea was, just like the Monroe Doctrine, it was the healthy version of the Monroe Doctrine, that where one nation of the Americas is healthy, we're all going to benefit. We all have to be part of one community. And that involves keeping empires, like especially Britain and France, out of the Americas and helping each other grow. So that's the idea of reciprocity. That's very different from NAFTA It's not the same thing as NAFTA. NAFTA is based on just getting rid of nation states across the board to a private globalized, system of Bilderberger group transhumanists. That's different. That was designed to destroy nations. This is designed to empower nations. Very different idea. And that's also why I brought in like Lincoln's message to Congress in 1864, when he's talking about both extending telegraph and rail lines through the Bering Strait to Russia. He's at the same time talking about his hopes to extend the newly built continental railways into South America. And he literally talks about Argentina and these various South American leaders who are looking to this with great hope that they can also have this extend. And in fact, McKinley was working very closely with a team of American engineers that were sponsored by James Blaine and McKinley and President Harrison to go and map out over 5,000 miles of rail lines all the way down through the Panama, Darien Gap throughout South America. And they developed this beautiful study, and they came out with this thing in 1890 while the McKinley tariff was on, saying that if we can do this McKinley tariff properly, then we could build up both America's capacities. These are all the rail lines in red, and that would connect through the Darien Gap, down through the Panama Canal, all the way down through South America, across Chile, all the way down to the tip of Argentina. So again, a very different idea than what I'm about to read here, because James Blaine was also very aware of these rhinos within the Republican Party. At the time, the Democrat Party was still their party of slavery and empire, but you had deep penetration into the Republican Party of a lot of traitors too. And Blaine, who again is one of the most amazing men, greatest heroes. He was Secretary of State twice, first under Garfield. When Garfield was killed, he also lost his job. And then again under Harrison. And he describes how this section of the party contains all the desperate bad men of the party, bent on loot and booty, and ready for any Mexican invasion or Caribbean annexation, and looking to excitements and filibusters, and possibly to a Spanish war as a legitimate means of continuing political power for a clique. These men are harmless when out of power and desperate when in possession of it. And of course, he's talking about what became the Theodore Roosevelt takeover of the Republican Party, who actually did get a war. They initiated a war using a false flag into the Philippines, which killed 1 million Philippine people in something that was sort of a precursor to the Vietnam War, where America really started losing its morality. And again, Teddy Roosevelt came in because he was positioned as VP under William McKinley. So when McKinley was killed, all of a sudden this treacherous Anglophile who had a pro-Confederate proclivity took over with the worst elements of these 19th century rhinos, who just started engaging in an abuse of the Monroe Doctrine. That was the McKinley, the Teddy Roosevelt big stick policy, carry a big stick. And I forget the other thing. Tread lightly and carry a big stick, I think was his foreign policy or something like that. Right.
Yeah. Or carry a big stick and hit everyone in the head with it as much as you could. Right.
Yeah.
Well,
And that's what Smedley Butler was exposing later on when he was saying I was a whore for big business, being sent in to overthrow governments of South America for big sugar and all Sullivan. That's what it was. It was under Teddy Roosevelt that this really got underway. The other thing that I thought was important is that he was on the commission to investigate the assassins of Lincoln. James Blaine was he understood counterintelligence very well, and he was talking about Judah Benjamin, the Secretary of State of the Confederacy, who was British born. He was into some weird B'nai B'rith Masonic crap, Judah Benjamin, and escaped to Canada and then Britain, lived out his days there. And he talks about this whole conspiracy run out of British operations in Canada, British Confederate operations in Canada to kill Lincoln. And he describes here Judah Benjamin was a confederacy, envisioned a confederacy whose one achievement should be the revival and extension of English commercial power on the continent. Benjamin took quick refuge under the flag to whose allegiance he was born, that's Britain. The manner in which he was lauded into notoriety in London, the effort constantly made to lionize and to aggrandize him, were conspicuous demonstrations of hatred to our government, and were significant expressions of regret that Mr. Benjamin's treason had not been successful. Those whom he served either in the Confederacy or in England in his efforts to destroy the American Union eulogize him according to his work. So there's two ideas I'm trying to weave together. which is number one, the extension of rail to empower nations to break free of British free trade and stand on their own 2 feet using the American system that involved the protective tariff and state credit. And number two, the political subterfuge of the fifth columnists of deep state working to undermine America from within to kill its presidents, including McKinley. And one of the things that they would do to work to make this happen. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, what's fascinating of what if you could pull that back up real quick. So he's kind of describing, in a sense, a little bit of party of false decorum here, which is like social incentive structures. But really more of what he's describing, like you said, he's describing intelligence and counterintelligence operations 3 years. This is from 1870, 3 years before British intelligence was formally created. So that's fascinating, which just goes to prove that the intelligence community apparatus, like whatever you want to call it, existed before it was formalized into a state agency.
Yeah, you had the British Foreign Office was a very, very sophisticated beast, for sure. And it had various facets that include Masonic aspects too that were very, very important and still are obviously very important for the maintenance of intelligence operations anywhere. The other thing that these groups would do, especially once again through Masonic and occult networks, were these communes that they would build up, especially as collectivist little communes, utopians, throughout America. In Buffalo was a big one, of anarchists. So they would utilize these useful idiot tool anarchists to carry out assassinations, targeted hits. And most of I would say like 90% of the assassinations of great leaders all over the world in the 1880s all the way up until like the 1930s were done by deployed anarchists that came out of these weird cult-like communes. In this case, Senator Mark Hanada, he's an advisor to William McKinley in 1900, right after McKinley is elected. He's warning about, quote, anarchists or socialists through their various organizations resolve to rid the earth of a number of its rulers, starting with the Empress Eugenie of Austria, the King of Italy, and then the President of the United States. And the first two calls have come to pass as predicted. That's an important statement because this guy is one of the key intelligence gurus and advisors to McKinley. Both he and McKinley despised Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt had already resigned his commission because he was responsible as Undersecretary of the Navy in 1897 for getting the U.S. enmeshed into a war with Spain in the Philippines. He also was pushing something with an invasion of Cuba with his Rough Riders as well, which had a whole crazy story. But that's important because, again, when McKinley dies in 1901, he's at the World's Fair in Buffalo. Again, very far removed from the big city centers in the East. And at the time, it was lesser developed, but it was the center of the World's Fair. It was one of the core compounds of anarchism. That's where Emma Goldman also deployed her little asset. I'm forgetting his name now. Leon Solgods or something, who's the guy who killed McKinley. McKinley was speaking at a Pan American rail booth when he got shot. He died 8 days later. This guy who does the shooting is a disciple of Emma Goldman. Emma Goldman was already being sold as this feminist hero anarchist, calling for like throwing bombs at heads of state in order to overthrow governments and bring in some new utopia that would just emerge out of the ashes. That's also what killed Tsar Alexander II, the great liberator, in 1880. Guiteau, who's the guy who killed Garfield, also describes how he was on this Oneida religious lodge and has no real recollection except that he just lived in horror. And he gave this testimony in an interview when he was waiting in his prison cell to, I guess, get the electric chair. I'm not too sure what happened to him. He probably got hung or something. Probably hung. But he gives his testimony describing how he's clearly in a religious cult with very foggy memories, except an impulse to kill Garfield that he had when he came out of it. Smells like MK Ultra to me. And again, like President Carnot of France also gets killed in 1895. Anarchists, all these anarchists are just being deployed like useful idiots. That's what almost kills Franklin Roosevelt as well. Like it's just, this is the way that they did it. And the anarchists are all protected. The center of command is, guess where? London. That's where you had the International Anarchist Conference of 1871 was in London. That's Prince Kropotkin, the claimant to the guy who says that he was the heir or the of the clan of the Rurik dynasty, who had aspirations to take back control because he saw himself as part of the non-Slavic Viking Rurik dynasty that he saw himself as being an heir to, the pagan proper Vikings that never forgave Vladimir the Great for Christianizing Russia. That guy, Prince Kropotkin, the king of the anarchists, and was also a very close friend with Emma Goldman, visited Buffalo twice, once in 1897, once in 1901. In 1901 was 1 month before McKinley was killed. So that guy, Prince Kropotkin, is important. He's the guy who took on the mantle after Mikhail Bakunin dies, and he's then like the new king of the anarchists. Creepy as fuck.
And Goldman's name is, what's his name?
Emma Goldman is a feminist leader. She's a like priestess, queen of I think of her as like this wannabe queen of anarchism. She was part of the British Neo-Malthusian League. She actually got bailed out of prison by Bertrand Russell. And she's the one who sort of handled.
Fascinating. You know where she's from?
Where? I do. Poland or Lithuania.
Yeah, the Pale of Settlement.
Yeah,
she's from the Lithuanian Pale of Settlement, and she's Orthodox Jewish. And interesting. I was like half joking, tongue in cheek. Like, I wonder if she's related to Dan Goldman,
maybe
the congressman who's also happens to be the scion of the Levi jeans fortune. But yeah. Anyway, I digress.
I'm actually wearing a Levi's hat right now. I feel kind of weird about that. No endorsement there. Yeah, you wonder if like the name for these things, does this like have something to do with like the Levites or something? Like, is this
that? Yeah, it is kind of weird because like when I was like doing research into all of that stuff, and I kept coming across the Lehigh militia, the Israeli militia, which became the IDF. I always thought of like Levi jeans. So, but yeah, I doubt there's any connection, but it's just, just the letters. Maybe
open possibility. All right.
Yeah.
But that being said, yes, this woman is real toxicity. And again, she's tied right into this international network, just the same way that terrorism today is used to destabilize governments you don't like. That was the anarcho-terrorism of the 1890s all the way up through the 1930s, when it began to transform a little bit into just hardcore fascism. One of the other things here is that the guy who should have been president is this guy Gareth. I'm forgetting his name. McKinley's vice president was Garrett Hobart from 1896 until 1899. Now, Garrett Hobart dies at the age of 55. I don't know if he's poisoned, but at this point, I'm so jaded, I just presume he was, because his death is convenient right before the elections to infuse Teddy Roosevelt, who had already declared himself an enemy of William McKinley, who had already initiated the war that got America enmeshed into this insane imperial war, its first war halfway around the world. And this guy all of a sudden is positioned now to be picked up as the vice president. There's a lot of pressure onto McKinley to do that by traitors within the Republican Party who demand that he does that. Same thing for how FDR is induced to replace Henry Wallace with Truman in 1945, which again brings in an Anglophile ass licker of the crown into a position to become the president if the actual vote elected president can be eliminated, which happens in both cases. The thing here, the first thing that Teddy Roosevelt does, I got a little list here just to round it out. He closed the U.S. immediately as soon as McKinley dies. Teddy Roosevelt closes the U.S. West to settlement, basically terrorizing and arresting congressmen and other Western opponents to his program. He brings in the Sierra Club as well. So the first big conservation policies that say we're going to protect nature from human development happen en masse under this guy. This is like the Biden 30-30 policy, the COP29 policy of protecting nature from humans. That's brought in by Teddy Roosevelt. He founds the conservation movement in America and sets up the Forestry Service as a new age propaganda machine officially modeled on the British regime in India. So just like Britain, the British Empire, removed 2/5 of India's land area from human development in order to protect India's natural ecosystems during a time of famine. That was the way that the British were able to stop rail and hydroelectric dams from being built in India. That's exactly what was used as the model for the U.S. Conservation Acts under Teddy Roosevelt. And people like John Muir, who were his advisors, or Frank Underhill.
Wow,
he completed.
That sounds a lot like the rhetoric they use with the climate change nonsense to argue against the industrialization of nations and the production of power plants and all that stuff. Wow, what a bunch of communists!
Yeah, exactly. See, I go through the list here just a bit more. He completed the consolidation of British financial power over the U.S. national industries and railroads. The railroads were gradually dismantled, and much of the West was left unpopulated and waste. He brought eugenics laws into America, so he sponsored top-down eugenics laws. He established the Anglo-American special relationship with King Edward VII in 1902. He helped Britain anarchize Russia and militarize Japan, so he provided as much U.S. support to the growth of anarchist movements through operators like Jacob Schiff and Max Warburg, who were like first wave Bolshevik revolution in 1905. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the Mensheviks at the time that were still separate. So that was part of the destabilization of Russia and the militarization of Japan. So originally, the Lincoln Republicans were all trying to go to Japan to help them actually develop industry and rail. And it was the British trying to weaponize Japan and use Japan like a marcher's lord to destroy the rest of Asia. America had a different philosophy, and that became undone under Teddy Roosevelt, who went with the British model instead. He was super anti-German. Like, he was really pushing a war with Germany before it was popular. And even leading up, when he was not president anymore, he was championing getting the U.S. on board with World War I way, way earlier than anyone else was. And yeah, he brutalized Spanish America and deliberately portrayed America as a tyrant to scare other nations into submission. And he said, here's a quote, "I wish very much that the wrong people could be prevented entirely from breeding. And when the evil nature of these people is sufficiently flagrant, this should be done. Criminals should be sterilized, and feeble-minded people forbidden to leave offspring behind them. But as yet, there is no way possible to devise which could prevent all undesirable people from breeding. The emphasis should be on getting desirable people to breed." So positive and negative eugenics. This guy's talking about openly in his Oxford speech in 1911. So he's very clearly a disgusting transhumanist and imperialist at the same time, which is usually what goes together.
One could be forgiven for thinking that he was describing himself.
Possibly. Maybe there was some subconscious forces there, perhaps. And the last thing I got here just is this picture here. That's just a thing to celebrate Teddy Roosevelt's creation of the one tongue, one people, Anglo-American super race empire that coincided with the creation of the Pilgrim Society in 1902 to sort of celebrate the murder of McKinley and the spirit of Lincoln. The Pilgrim Society was also created first in Britain and then in America in 1902 to enshrine this Anglo-American convergence to undo the American Revolution. And to this very day, there's still a Pilgrim Society in Washington, which exerts a massive amount of influence onto the nation, which was chaired by Henry Kissinger for years and years and years. And the worst people in Washington and abroad are part of this Pilgrim Society that works with the Rhodes Foundation, the Rhodes Trust, of Rhodes Scholars and Fabians. They're all very closely related to the same thing. That's really just trying to actualize what Teddy Roosevelt wanted to bring online a century ago. So that's basically my presentation aspect, my formal presentation.
Interesting. Well, I do have something that I stumbled upon that I want to share, but first, let's do the other ad.
Oh yeah.
It's widely known that the body's own immune system is a God-given first responder to help us deal with the smallest of concerns to the most catastrophic. Our friends at Pet Club 24/7 have developed natural products that contain the most potent strain of mushroom that's been used for thousands of years to support the immune system. So visit the website today to discover how they're changing the way that pets and people are being treated for the better.
Cool. Yep. All right. I was kind of scrolling through her Wikipedia. This is Emma Goldman again, and I just found this one thing that I know people are going to find this fascinating. So it says Goldman joined Margaret Sanger in crusading for women's access to birth control. Both women were arrested for violating the Cornstalk law. It says when Margaret Sanger, an advocate of access to contraception, coined the term, quote, birth control, because she made that word up, and disseminated information about various methods in the June 1914 issue of her magazine, The Woman Rebel, she received aggressive support from Goldman. The latter had already been active in efforts to increase birth control access for several years. In 1916, Goldman was arrested for giving lessons in public on how to use contraceptives. Sanger, too, was arrested under the Cornstalk law, which prohibited the dissemination of, quote, obscene, lewd, or lascivious articles, which authorities defined as including information related to birth control. And then it also just notes up here, like in the opening paragraphs of her Wikipedia, that she was a supporter of the Bolsheviks. So just, it's just like, you notice these things about people when it's like the same thing over and over and over again. It's like these oligarchs, they always want the same thing. It's like, all right, well, let's teach people how to not breed, not procreate. Let's teach people how to overthrow their government. Let's teach people how to hate themselves and hate their culture and hate everything about everything around them, want to tear it all down and basically turn themselves into a vapid, useless slave caste, basically.
Yeah, and we'll do that under the idea that they want this for their liberty, to empower themselves. So we have to give them some construct of logic that will have them become convinced that they want the things that are ultimately going to enslave and destroy them, because it's going to empower them to do what they want, which will be the whole of the law, right? Follow your own heart's desires, right? If you wake up and you feel like a girl, but you were born a boy, well, that's nature's fault. It's the reality is you are a girl because you feel that way at the moment. So you should cut off your schlong and start, acting accordingly, and you'll be more empowered. Now, what happens? Well, the consequence is massive suicide and depression spikes across the board for all of these poor kids who have been groomed. And it's not just me saying this. The whole Tavistock clinic in the UK was shut down. A whole department was shut down because all of the psychiatrists basically had a mass revolt saying, no, we've been for years and years artificially grooming children dishonestly into becoming convinced that they're the opposite gender, and they had enough of it. They stormed out, caused a hullabaloo. It's on public record. So it's not for their own empowerment. This is satanic. So the fact that Margaret Sanger is also pushing massive eugenics. She's a hardcore racist, calling for massive sterilizing black people. Just like, Teddy Roosevelt, it's very similar in spirit. These people are disgusting. They're pushing a satanic doctrine because they're trying to, again, say whatever you want to do is right. And truth is just how you feel. That's what's true. And that's what the worst elements of the Bolsheviks were doing when Sanger was supporting them, and when Emma Goldman and the Webbs and the Fabians were all supporting the Bolsheviks early on. At a certain point, something happened that's interesting, where there was a fight of nationalists in Russia that said enough is enough, and they kicked out all of these creeps from power, and you had what are known as these purges that began. And if you actually look at a lot of these purges, they're actually not really. We've been told that was just Stalin destroying his enemies like a tyrant, and I'm sure he was tyrannical in many ways. But at the same time, when I've seen enough evidence to demonstrate that these purges were actually real, because there were Trotskyist and satanic anarchistic elements penetrating all parts of the government and education system that were taken down because, again, this thing is bigger than communism or capitalism. Like, there were actually just Russians who remembered what their traditions were, going back to the days of Vladimir the Great, who organized around certain things in the 30s and in the 40s that were able to then at least separate themselves from the worst aspects of these Satanists, who then all started all of a sudden becoming the basis of the neocon anti-Russian movement by the late 30s and 40s. So all of the Trotskyists and Fabians, who were like loving the Bolsheviks in the 20s, all of a sudden become the patrons of the new anti-Russian conservative, or, you know, the whole like neocon operation, like James Burnham and Albert Kahn, or, you know, all of these guys are like Irving Kristol. They're all Trotskyists. They're all Bolshevik Trotskyists. And then they become hard-right neocons running McCarthyism. And it's like, why did you make that change? And it's like, maybe that's not an inconsistency with your overall philosophy. Maybe it's totally consistent, which is interesting too.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, it's just crazy. It's crazy just thinking about all these things that we are facing right now, that we're dealing with, which a lot of this stuff predated Trump. I mean, Trump came into office in 2016. He certainly was doing political commentary from Twitter. His Twitter was actually pretty fire. Like back in like 2012, he was firing off some pretty, he was talking about vaccines and talking about all kinds of stuff back in 2012. And he was a salty sailor when he went back in, you know, he kind of cleaned it up a little bit when he started deciding he was going to run for office. But, you know, a lot of these things that we're dealing with now, they were dealing with then. They were dealing with 130 years ago, 140 years ago. They were dealing with all that stuff. It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. And it's the same fight over and over and over and over again. With every generation, it just has slightly different framing, slightly different branding. And it's insane that we haven't been able to put it, like, nip this thing in the butt and just put it into it. And I feel like we have a real opportunity to do that now.
Yeah,
we have a real opportunity to expose this whole thing, expose this whole grift, this whole oligarchy that does this stuff. We just have to seize the moment and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful way of putting it. And I think that I was thinking a lot about Trump's endorsement of the Alaska-Canada railway in 2020, right before the Biden coup. And that rail line is like 100 years in the waiting to finally extend the lower 48 states through Alberta into Alaska, and then lawfully the next lawful step would be onward through the Bering Strait that Vladimir Putin has already called for building twice, just like Lincoln had done 150 years ago, and just like McKinley was moving America towards as well. It's the same orientation. And I found this quote, which would be a nice way, I guess, round out our presentation, by General Curtin. What's his name? General Andrew Curtin, who Governor Andrew Curtin from Philadelphia was being sent off to become U.S. ambassador to Russia in 1869, and it was a party organized by Henry C. Carey, Lincoln's primary advisor. And General Joshua Owen rises to give a toast. And Joshua Owen is, again, one of these core American system allies, great Civil War hero, and a big player in this whole U.S.-Russia relationship, which is so key because, again, Russia was building its Trans-Siberian Railway with American locomotives, with American assistance and guidelines, applying the American protective tariff under Sergei Witte, the transport minister in the 1890s, who was very closely aligned with McKinley. Sergei Witte and McKinley were key. Witte was the guy who became first prime minister under Nicholas II, and organized the creation of the Duma. You know, the idea of a constitutional monarchy that would be based upon the general welfare, but the protective tariff of the Lincoln Greenback type system of state banks. He was very much in alignment with McKinley. Anyway, this guy's about to go off to become ambassador, and Joshua Owen gives this toast, and it's so good. I wish I had it written down on screen, but I don't. So I'll just read it here. I wrote it on my paper. He says here, "We stand on the shores of the Pacific and cast wistful eyes over its expansive waters to see if any kindred people will join us in girdling the globe with a tramway of iron, railways. We have discovered that great glory is only to be attained through the performance of great deeds, which tend to advance civilization and develop the material wealth of people. In pursuance of these noble objects, we have discarded war, although we had organized the greatest war power of ancient or modern times. Who are our allies in the old world in the prosecution of this grand design? Not the English, for they are our commercial rivals, and not the French, for they are jealous of our democratic institutions. The Russians have become simultaneously with us the champions of freedom by emancipating their slaves. However much common origin, common language, and common religion, or some grand sentiment may unite peoples, the greatest bond is community of interest and identity of destiny. Let Tsar Alexander construct a Grand Trunk Railway from the Baltic Sea to the Sea of Okhotsk, I don't know where that is, of like gauge with our Pacific Central, and he will maintain his firm hold on his vast dominions and outflank the movement made by France and England for predominance in the East through the Suez Canal. America and Russia, if this is done, can dictate peace to the world." And I just thought that was so good because the historical trend has been that it was through an American-Russian relationship that the American Revolution was made possible. Again, Russia intervened to save America in the Civil War. Russia and America together stopped the Wall Street London Hitler project from succeeding. And what I'm seeing now as a potential is you have like Russia, China, the multipolar alliance as sort of picking up the torch that was dropped by largely, the murder of these great presidents of America. And they're just begging for America to wake up and remember what we really were, so that we can go and fulfill our historical destiny. That was put in beautiful words in 1869. That's when the speech was spoken that I just read. And I just see it, the possibility, despite all of these vipers who I don't trust around Trump, I see so many good people, good patriots, organizing as well, that can tap into what's already being brought online with Russia and China and this McKinley spirit once more. So I hope that can happen. And I hope this little video we did educate some people around that strategic flank.
For sure. And yeah, I mean, I think next week we'll get into Syria, and I'm gonna see. So let's talk about GART. We'll talk about GART here in a minute. I'll do the ad read for it, but I'm gonna be seeing Colonel Towner Watkins at GART, and so maybe I'll talk to her if she's available to come on next Wednesday to talk about Syria. Syria is popping off now. You have the IDF doing airstrikes there. They have special operations forces on the ground doing running operations there. It seems to me, and I'm just kind of speculating here, but it seems to me that they're trying to decapitate the Syrian government by killing Assad. And if they were to do that, I think it would take an already pretty destabilized country and just push it all into the abyss. And you would see, I think the strategic value of doing that is probably to get Hezbollah to invest more resources in Syria, because they already have a huge fighting force there. That would then leave Lebanon more vulnerable to an offensive campaign. Russia's also obviously in Syria, so I think you're going to see Syria, I think, might become like the actual battleground where you're going to see Russia in the West. I mean, not that Russia and the West haven't already been engaging there for 10 years, but I think you're going to see, in the context of this, between now and maybe Trump coming back into office, you might see Russia and NATO square off in Syria. But we'll get into that next week. Let's do the ad read. So this weekend, the whole reason we're doing this pre-record is because we have GART 6. It's hard to believe it's already the 6th one, but let me read this. Badlands Media is bringing the post-election excitement from Making America Great Again to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, with the 6th stop on the Great American Restoration Tour. November 14th through 17th, GART 6 is heading to the beach to discuss and celebrate the election in an event that promises to create lasting memories. Whether you are a seasoned Badlander or a curious newcomer, GART has something for everyone. For those who can't join us in person, you can still take part in the event with a virtual ticket. Virtual tickets ensure you are part of the action wherever you may be. Virtual ticket holders gain access to an exclusive GART chat to interact with other in-person and virtual attendees. And I will say that chat, you can post memes and videos. So it is like it's like having a live chat, but you get like more to it. It's like an image message board almost, like Telegram. Get behind the scenes photos and videos. Get to ask the panel questions so you can be part of the live discussion. I know that Jordan Sather's going to have his camera there, and he's probably going to be doing a lot of behind the scenes stuff like he did in Deadwood. John also does stuff as well. While many of our show guests are at the conference, you may notice some changes to our regularly scheduled programming. Get your fix of Badlands Media by purchasing your virtual ticket today. And if you can't watch live, don't fret. Replays of the entire event will be available to all ticket holders. A special thank you to Love Litters for sponsoring this unforgettable stop on the Great American Restoration Tour. Don't miss out. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/events for details on both in-person and virtual ticket holders and virtual tickets. So highly encourage everyone to join us, get a virtual ticket. I feel like the virtual ticket, you get a lot out of it. And I will also add that looking at the boosts, if you want to, you can go to badlandsmedia.tv/support-us. And then click on Badlands Boost and leave. It's like a Rumble rant, but you can leave even after the show ends. This episode that we did right now came from, I can't remember if it was a Rumble rant or a boost, but the idea for it, somebody asked, they said, can you do a deep dive on William McKinley and the tariffs so we can better understand it? I hope everyone found it enlightening. I feel like it's very, very relevant to what we're about to go through. And everyone should walk away from this conversation with confidence that we can, in fact, survive as a nation without being taxed up to our eyeballs and paying federal taxes and having an IRS and having a Federal Reserve and all the crap that they created over the past century. With that said, Matt, you have any closing thoughts?
No, I think you said it very, very well. Yeah, there's definitely there's other ways, more natural, healthy ways of creating revenue than simply extracting taxes or getting war booty or something like that by destroying a nation and stealing their stuff. Those are really archaic definitions of wealth creation that are actually wealth destruction. They're not wealth creation at all. The idea of a protective tariff, looking out for your actual people's interests and increasing your powers of productive labor, by stimulating what infuses value into everything, which is the human creative reason. I mean, the whole purpose of an economy is to satisfy the needs of people and to do it better with every generation, so that every generation can expect to live better than their parents or grandparents, which is the natural way that human society has tended to move for most of our experience in the last millennia. And when you lose that sense that, like, this is the first time we actually have increasingly the opinion that the young generation are going to live worse than the older generation, you're out of whack with the universe. You've done something fundamentally wrong. And you got to reevaluate your assumptions. The protective tariff discussion, the broader American system fight against the British system of rapacious, opium war, extractive ideas of wealth by destruction is really at the heart of the fight. And I think if we take this opportunity of crisis to really reevaluate our core assumptions and to get back on a proper track, we can be human again. We can act like real humans act. Living, loving each other, thinking about our neighbors from a standpoint of respect, and appreciate the differences in all of us, both culturally and individually, at the same time as we're unified in a common theme, a common principle that unites us all as a human family, seeking to make life better for our kids in a universe that's constantly creative, has ever more laws to discover. We'll never be at the end of we'll never like discover everything, which is why it's beautiful, because there's always more to discover. There's always tension. And that's the basis of healthy competition, not just like kill the weak in order for the strong to thrive. It's the basis of a very different and a much more healthy way of thinking. So I'm very optimistic that golden age can be something that we might even start seeing the sparks of it. I think we are seeing the sparks of it in our lifetimes, and maybe we'll see it blossom still before we die in a more mature way, I hope.
Yeah, well, very well said. And the two things that I've been thinking about, one of them I mentioned on the GART live stream last week. One, publicly funded projects has become a very dirty word, like a dirty concept in America, right? Because anytime you talk about spending public monies, you're talking about taxation, you're talking about raising taxes, you're talking about extracting more wealth from the people, right? Well, if we are instead funding our government and funding these potential public projects, many of which you've covered many projects on this show that have, like the Transcontinental Railroad, things that have been shown to be a really, really good benefit to our society. If these are instead funded by tariffs that are collected from, essentially oligarchs, the equivalent of international conglomerates and corporations today that are trying to sell their goods made in other countries to us, maybe the mindset and the perspective, like the perception of what public money is and how it's spent can be changed, and we can actually start looking at it as, hey, we can take this money that we're getting from these oligarchs and you put it to good use to actually fund things that are worthwhile, and maybe stop thinking about it as something that is inherently communist or inherently collectivist. The other thing I was thinking about is that from just a geopolitical standpoint, or just like a domestic financing standpoint, whenever they want to expand the budget, they don't think twice about it. The Congress is like, oh yeah, of course, expand the budget, spend more money. We'll just extract the wealth from the people. Done, right? Well, they can't do that anymore with the tariffs. If they want to expand their budgets, they're going to have to increase tariffs, which is then going to put them at a disadvantage when they go to speak to their partners in other countries, because they're going to say, hey, wait a minute, you just raised tariffs on me. Like, I don't want to talk to you, or they're going to raise tariffs against us. So it's like, it kind of puts the lawmakers like in this position where they can't really just, arbitrarily raise the budget or increase the budget without having real impact against them, against the country. It's a much bigger deal, I think, to expand the budget if you are operating from a tariff-funded government.
I love the way you just said that, because it puts the politics back in economics. It's political economy. It shouldn't be separate. And right now we just have a bunch of like political class placeholders who are there just to represent whatever lobby groups are paying them the most.
They're parasites. Yeah.
They're parasites. Yeah. And the political class should be one of the most sacred jobs in the world, that you're willing to, like, you should be willing to die for principles to be in the political world, right? That you have, and that means that you have to be somebody who has deep understanding of what you're operating on, that you're dealing with, because you're like an engineer of government in a sense. Like, you have to know the science of what makes society work, which is the base of economics. Like, what is production, what goes into all of the things that allow for an industry to exist, or an agricultural process to increase, or anything. And so that's very much tied to real economics, and there should be implications for your decisions, whether you're benefiting people or not, that you could be held accountable for, which they're not today. Nobody's holding them accountable because there's no standards by which you could say they're doing or not doing their job according to like something that's practical, because they're just representing these, like you said, supranational entities, and treating the human beings like something that you like just squeeze juice out of or something, or that you on a farm. Or not. I was thinking about a milk cow, but anyway, all that's, my metaphors are getting messy here. But all that to say, I think you're absolutely right. There's so many reasons why and I don't think the protective tariff is like the overall magic wand solution to everything, but it is you can't have that solution without the protective tariff. It forces your mindset into a much healthier place as an American, as a human.
It also severs the relationship between the federal government and the citizen, because we should not have a direct relationship with the federal government. It should be the relationship should be between the state governments and the federal government, and our relationship should be between our local government and our state government. Like, we should be following laws passed by the state government that are enforced by the local government. The federal government should not be passing laws that are enforced upon the citizen. The federal government should be passing laws that are enforced upon the states, and then the states respond to those laws. And if they're not constitutional, then the state sues the federal government, and that should be where the interaction occurs, not between citizen and federal government, because that's where you get into tyranny. But we're getting into a whole other episode of breaking history. So.
All right, cool. All right, so it's getting late. All right, so this is fun. This is really good, and I guess we'll just do this again on Wednesday, maybe with Colonel Watkins. So we'll see how it goes.
Yes. We had a great showing at GART last time. So many people, the last 2 times actually, so many people, Breaking History fans were there. So I hope to see more of you there. If you see me, please come up and say hello. Don't be shy. Or maybe in the virtual chat. So see y'all there.
All right. Bye.